Hey again, guys. This is part 2 of our first episode, How to Taste Wine. If you haven't already seen it, in the first episode, we covered how to look at wine and how to smell wine. There's actually a multi-step process where you can get to tasting wine as part of the full sensory experience for breaking it all down. So my name's Matt. This is Justin. We're part of the management team here at Nektar. I think Justin's going to take it away with talking about how to taste a wine.
Yeah. So finally, first step you're going to do is you want to acclimate your palate to the wine. So if you've been drinking coffee or water or anything else, honestly, you're going to take some time to warm up your palate to the wine because it's going to develop a little bit. So first thing you do is take a nice sip, swash around your mouth, kind of like mouthwash, and then either expectorate it, spit it out, or drink it. And then you can go in for a second taste and kind of reevaluate there and start thinking about your tasting notes. First thing I generally look for when I'm tasting a wine after I have my 3 and 3 things that I smelled is confirmation on those things. So I smelled fresh raspberries. Do I taste fresh raspberries? Do I taste, pencil shavings or anything like that I drew up before? Now, this isn't a foolproof thing. You're not always going to taste what you smell. And a lot of wines, in fact, do smell differently than they taste, which is kind of cool too, because then if you didn't get that 3 and 3, say you could only pick out 1 fruit and 2 non-fruits, when you taste it, then you could plug those other, tasting notes in. So say when you actually drink it, you taste a little bit of like a tobacco or cinnamon or something, you could plug that right in, which is great. And then you'll have your full 6 descriptors.
You don't be afraid to go back and forth. Once you've finished smelling a wine, there's no reason you can't go back and make second opinions on that after you've tasted it.
Of course.
There's no rules about this process.
So there's going to be a bunch of stuff that jumps out of the glass when you start actually tasting, but there's 4 main ones that I want to focus on. First one being acidity. So acidity is going to hit the sides of your tongues, and it's going to make your mouth water. It's going to be like a sour candy, pretty much. So basically, when your mouth starts to water and you feel your mouth start to pucker up a little bit, that means the wine has high acid. Now, you can use this in the future for pairing and stuff like that, but for our purposes now, it's just to remember the wine. So if you try a wine, typically white wines tend to be higher in acid. You try a white wine, you're like, whoa, that's really tart, really sour, just so you could talk about it to people.
It can be refreshing too. I think, especially when the first time you hear it, acidity can sound like a pretty intense kind of term, but wines can be very refreshingly acidic as well. And a lot of times, again, this is future video subject matter, but it can kind of prime your palate for what you're eating.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Like these 4 things that we're going to talk about kind of work in harmony to bring the overall impression of the wine. So, it's not going to be just acid. It's not going to be just sweetness. It's going to be a balance of multiple different things to kind of work together and provide the personality of the wine.
It's like a food recipe. You want a little bit of everything to kind of bring it together in the end.
Yeah, for sure. Next thing after acidity is going to be dryness or sweetness. So this is actually probably the first sensation that you're going to get when you try the wine because the sweetness receptor is right at the tip of your tongue. So when we talk about dry or sweet wines, we tend to get a lot of confusion from customers and connoisseurs alike. Sweetness is one of those things that if a wine has sweetness, you're going to tell. It's going to be the measure of sugar actually in the wine. So if there's a sweet wine, it's going to be sweet. You're going to taste sweetness. Often gets confused with fruitiness. So
not mutually exclusive.
Yes. Yeah. So if you have a very fruity wine, a fruit-forward wine, doesn't necessarily mean it's sweet, but it's going to give you the illusion of sweetness just because fruit's kind of sweet.
I think going back to the first video too, when you were talking about adjectives for the descriptors, that's where that comes into play. Because an underripe raspberry isn't going to be as sweet as a fully ripe or a baked or a candied raspberry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can have elements of fruit without that meaning it's going to be sweet.
Yeah, so if you're looking for what an actual sweet wine is going to taste like, I recommend checking out some dessert wines because they are really, really sweet. And that's going to be like the extreme spectrum of sweetness. But in general, when you're talking about wine, you have dry to sweet. So dry is going to be almost no sugar present in the wine. Sweet's going to be sugar present.
I would argue the majority of quality wines, you're not going to see a lot of sweet wines out there.
Yeah.
Some of them are fantastic, but generally speaking, wines considered to be of, better quality are going to be on the drier side usually.
Absolutely. Cool. So what's next?
I think one of the most confusing terms when you're first getting into wine tasting, you might have heard it thrown around before, but tannins. Now what tannins mean in a wine is this is during the process when the grapes are fermenting. The longer they spend in contact with seeds and skins and stems, all the stuff that's not the grape juice, basically. Even wood can impart a little bit of a tannic structure on there. As far as sensation goes, an example I like to use is almost all of us at some point in our lives have gone to make a black tea, like an Earl Grey or something. You put the tea bag in the hot water, you walk away, you forget about it, you come back, and it's just got this astringent bitterness to it. It dries your mouth, your lips and tongue kind of dry, your mouth puckers.
Bitterness is a good adjective for that.
Absolutely.
I usually, say those part and parcel. Tannin is going to, bring the bitterness to it. So if you think of black tea, like a really strong black tea. And I love that example too, because, it makes sense if you think about an actual tea bag. So what's in it? It's going to be leaves, seeds, stems, stuff like that, that actually soaking in the hot water. And that's the same exact concept, but with wine, with grapes.
Exactly. It's not a concept exclusive to wine, but you usually only hear the word tannic when you're talking about wine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all those earthy, rooty kind of flavors that we're all familiar with in some way or another.
Yeah, for sure.
I think after that, again, could be a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with the concept, but the concept of body in a wine. Now, body, more than anything else, is a description of texture and mouthfeel and the weight of the wine. The way it feels on your tongue, all the concepts that don't describe the taste specifically. An example I always like to use is kind of a spectrum of different heaviness of milk, which again, we're all familiar with. Even if you don't know a lot about wine, we've all had milk before for the most part. So a full-bodied wine, those are like your heavy creams. Those are thick and rich. They have a weight that kind of like sits on your tongue even after you finish, taking a sip. Compare that to a medium-bodied red wine. That's more of your whole milk. Again, still thick and heavy, but not nearly as much so as with a heavy cream. And then finally, you're going to have a light-bodied red wine, which I would compare more to like a 2% milk. Starting to get thinner, still has a little bit of structure to it. But I would argue it's got more of like a watered down taste, for lack of a better term. Right. Not a bad thing, again, because some light, refreshing red wines can be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And, we're mentioning red wine just because that's what we're drinking right now, but these concepts also apply to white wine as well. So white wines have that same spectrum where it's going to be light or heavy or bold, as they call it. And it's going to, revolve around that concept of body, which is going to be your overall impression of the wine, how it's actually drinking. So.
And a lot of other factors we're talking about, like, the alcohol content, the sugar level, those are what's going to affect the body of the wine, but we'll get more into that later.
Right.
But it's the culmination of all the things that aren't the flavors you're tasting.
Yeah.
It's the texture you're feeling.
Right. Exactly.
That can be confusing when you're used to thinking of texture as something you do with your hands. But, again, with the milk example, we all know the difference, even just in the viscosity level of, 2% milk and heavy cream.
Yeah.
Without even getting into the taste of it.
Right. Cool. So then would be the final step, which is think about it. So just a quick recap. You have your sight. You look at it, you see how concentrated the color is. You see if there's any rim variation, which is going to tell you if it's an old or a young wine. And then you're looking for the legs or the tiers, which is going to tell you where it is on the alcohol spectrum or sweetness level, right? Then you go to smell, which is where you pick out your 3 and 3, your 3 fruits. Try to put on adjectives on there, and your 3 non-fruits, same thing. Try to attach an adjective to kind of help you memorize that. Then taste. So the 4 things that we just talked about:
acidity, tannins, body, dry versus sweet.
Yeah,
those are your 4 main categories you're going to be using to describe the flavors of a wine.
Right. So by now you should have a pretty decent list or idea of what the wine's tasting like. And then the last step, you can kind of take it as far as you want. So thinking about it is the last step. So you think about the wine. Normally, if you're not going into super in-depth, you can just start with, do I like it? Do I like this wine? Is it good? What do I like about it? What don't I like about it? Because those things are going to be the easiest things for you to pick out and actually talk about and remember. So I can easily describe something that I like, but I can easily also describe something that I don't like and why I don't like it. So just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's a bad wine, just means it's not your style. But when you're talking to customers, especially about it, or somebody else when you're trying to explain the wine, the descriptors that you're finding that you may not care for, they might actually be into. So it's nice to kind of play that middle ground there. And then if you want to take it more in depth, what this is going to do is help you build a vocab and almost an encyclopedia of wine that you've tried. So take the wine and say, okay, you like it or you don't like it. And then you think about, okay, well, have I had something like this before? You know, after you get like 10, 15 wines deep, you could be like, well, this kind of tastes like that. And I found this note and that note, and then it kind of snowballs. Oh, what grape is it? Where is it from? And these are going to help you draw like a map of the types of wine that you've had and what they actually taste like.
That's going to help you out in bars and restaurants and wine stores. Knowing what you like and why, and what you don't like and why, is going to help you out with making decisions and purchases in the future.
Right.
I think it's part of the fun of it too. Like, even if you walk away deciding overall you're not in love with the wine, I think this educational way of breaking it down, you know, you still walk away having learned something. And even wines you don't like per se, you're going to find a couple of things about them that you do like generally. It doesn't have to be a whole like black and white spectrum.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, it's especially fun when you're sitting down with a couple people and you're trying it together. And like I said, if you go with the first thing that comes to your mind, my first thing that I think of is not going to be Matt's first thing that he thinks of. And then you're going to be like, oh, wait, like, you're right, that does taste like that. And it's kind of fun to like play around with that. And, like, you know, just turn it into a conversation, like a relaxed type thing, not like a blind tasting sommelier test where it's like.
That's a good point too, because I think especially when you're doing tastings in groups, I think that's good advice for, you know, making your own opinions for a couple of seconds, maybe a couple minutes, and then coming together as a group and talking about it. Because with wine tasting especially, as soon as someone says something that they smell or taste, even if you weren't getting those notes yourself, immediately you're going to be smelling and tasting what they mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a very subjective thing, and influence can be a big part of that.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And that's why it's also important not to judge yourself too much and kind of just roll with it. Because just because you're coming up with different tasters than somebody else doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean they're wrong. You know, you can both be right. So that wraps up today, I think. I think that's pretty much all we want to do for the first 4 steps. A couple things I want to talk about before we go. What we actually tried today, first of all. So we are drinking, I know you can't see the label, but this is Primitivo. It's an Italian red wine, like medium plus bodied or something like that, I would say. It's amazing, super affordable. If you want to buy this wine that we tried today, we are offering it at NektarNewHope.com for our takeout. You could buy it in the grocery section. You could buy it in the pickup section. So try it out.
Also, like Zinfandel, big similarities to Zinfandel.
Yeah, it's like Italian Zinfandel.
Exactly.
Right. A couple other things that I want to talk about. We do have some upcoming events. So in light of recent things, we're going to start doing virtual tasting events with our wine rep. Her name is Gail. She's wonderful. She's going to do a walkthrough of a flight of wine and then some pairing things as well. So if you're interested in this, check out the website, check out the Facebook, Nektar Wine Bar. And then you can also order the wines to go and bring them home and do the tasting with her live, which is cool. So it's going to be fun. It's also going to be up on the Facebook for a couple days too. So if you can't make it on that Friday night, you can buy the bottles and try them later, or you could just buy one bottle, whatever you want to do. It's cool. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. If you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us at the NektarDrinkingBuddies@gmail.com email. Any questions you have we didn't cover today, even not about this subject, if there's anything you want to know, sure. We'll get back to you pretty much almost immediately.
We are bored. We miss talking to people.
Questions to answer.
So, hit us up. And then next episode, what do you think we're going to do?
I think coming up next week, we're going to be looking at different types of whiskey. Whiskey can be a pretty confusing subject as a whole. It's got a lot more confusion and nuance compared to wine, which is, even though it's very in-depth, relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
Before you even get to tasting whiskey, we'll talk about like different kinds of whiskey that are out there, so that when you taste it, you have a better idea what you're looking for.
Yeah, we'll break it down style-wise. So, you know, what's rye, what's bourbon, what's scotch, what's an Irish whiskey. We'll talk about that a little bit just to help you out.
So look forward to that, and we'll see you soon.
Cool.